But yeah,
They're
and
trying to
then
be pretentious.
she asks him like, "Do you know of the Katan?" She asked, surprising me. I now had an inkling of how important such things were to to the Adem, so I hesitated to give an open answer. However, I did not want to lie either. Perhaps apology. She nodded. You are cautious. Yes. Are you Shayan? Shayan nodded. When did you suspect me of being who I am? When you asked of the Katan, I said. When did you suspect me of knowing more than a barbarian should? When I saw you set your feet? Another silence. And he's like, Shayan, why do you not wear the red like other mercenaries? She made an unfamiliar gesture. Has your teacher told you why they wear red? And he's like, I didn't think to ask. I said, not wanting to imply Tempe neglected my training. I ask you then. I thought a moment. So their enemies will not see them bleed? Approval. Why then do I wear white? The only answer I could think of chilled me. Because you do not bleed? She gave a partial nod. Also, because if an enemy draws my blood, she should see it as her fair reward. I like that line because it's fucking badass. It's
Pretty
like, I'm a
badass.
fucking
Yeah.
boss. That's why.
She's
You cut me, you earn that shit.
she's a regular Don Johnson, right?
Yeah. And you get their matriarchal society and the fact that the way she says it in the
Yeah.
also if an enemy draws my blood, she should see that it's her
Mm.
fair reward. Which
Yeah,
establishes
it's
because that's the first time when you get here, this is when you first discover that it is a matriarchal society, and now all those lines that Tempe had said, like you can get an extra woman, or like do you need any more women to have your back, and those kind of things, which seem like slights and insults. Then it's at these moments, like all of a sudden, then you get here and you're like, oh, so like the women are the fighters in this society. They're the dominant fighting force of this society. So this is a completely different arrangement than you see anywhere else.
yeah, and that's especially important in the examples you just gave where he's not insulting them. He's being
No, he's
rational.
being
It's a
earnest.
ration.
He's
Yeah.
earnest. It's hilarious because it sounds like it's an shit talking insult,
Yeah.
and he's just taking a dig at these people's egos. But in his mind, he's paying them a great compliment.
And he's challenging them
Eh,
much further
eh,
as well.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. He's saying like, get your best warriors, get as many of your strong as you can possibly get. But yeah, and he's like, I fretted, I fretted silently, doing my best to mimic proper Adem composure. After an appropriate polite pause, I asked, "What will become of Tempe?" And she's like, "That remains to be seen. Are you not concerned for yourself?" It's like, I'm more concerned for Tempe. And so this is where you get the kind of this sleeping mind aspect of him in this society where he's like the sword tree spun patterns on the wind. It was almost hypnotic. So I think this is interesting because when he looks at the tree, this is a moment where he's like starting to see the name of the wind. Like he looks at it, kind of sees the pattern. And Elodin talked about like if you want to go find the name of the wind, you got to go to the edge of the world. You go to these dangerous places. And so this spinning tree with these knives, you look at it and you start to see the name of the wind. He's saying it's hypnotic. And then when he slips himself into spinning leaf, then he sees the name of the wind and he's able to call it. But this is a place where it's real conducive for naming.
Mm.
And then you have this fight with Cheyenne, and he's talking about the steps she's taking. She's taking these perfect steps. This is not something you like if you're playing a video game. Yeah, sure, you might get the moves down where you know exactly how far the distance you can step back, so you're only moving back is exactly as far as you need, but that's not realistic to like normal fighting. You don't train to be that good. No, the best boxers in the world, every now and again you might run into a boxer that's real good at playing defense, but he's still getting hit. Even, Mayweather would get
Mm.
hit, but even though he's a great defensive fighter, he's still going to get hit. They, move in ways where it's seems otherworldly on their ability to not get hit. So when he's talking about like she's taking these perfect steps, when she only needs to move a centimeter, she just moves a centimeter. She doesn't move more than that. And then when he calls the name of the wind later on, when he's going through the tree, he's like taking steps and he mentions that like the moves that he's making, he's doing all their little different moves defensively to avoid the falling of the
Mhm.
leaves. And he's like, I realized I was moving like Cheyenne. I was taking perfect steps. When I only needed to move a centimeter, I only moved a centimeter, that kind of thing. So I think that the reason for their strong ability is one, that they're in an environment where it's conducive for naming. That Kavoth picks up on it immediately. As soon as he looks at the tree, he starts to see the patterns of the wind. And when he slips into spinning leaf, he's able to call the name of the wind.
So
But
Shay,
I
so sh-
think like their abilities, I think that they are utilizing, accessing like that sleeping mind.
mhm. So I was going to say Shane's basically sort of doing like magic through her body movements.
Correct. Yeah.
It's a type of magic. She's accessing something
She's at least
other
in that mind state
extraordinary.
where maybe she doesn't have the naming ability, but she's in that sleeping mind. She's like accessing her sleeping mind so that she's just able to just instinctively move the proper distances to avoid your contact, and she's just moving perfectly, which seems like a sleeping mind type of state where it's an instinctual thing rather than an analytical thought
Well,
process.
so kind of like Kavoth in the woods by himself playing
Yeah.
music. Yeah.
Yeah, he's just instinctively playing the notes. He's not thinking through like, I'm going to play these chords and this kind of thing. He just like sees the name of, sees a wind turning a leaf or whatever, and he
Hmm.
instinctually plays that sound. It's a similar thing when they're like accessing their sleeping mind, because the fact that in the moment that he was fully in sleeping mind mode is the time where he felt like he was moving like Cheyenne. I think that's significant. And the fact that when he looks at the tree, he sees the pattern of the wind, and there's got to be some kind of reason why they are like a supernaturally good at fighting. It cannot just be training. That doesn't make any sense, because then it's just a technique that if once you learn it, then everybody can do that just with practice.
So
But they
the
are just unbelievably good.
so the tree itself, that area, is like the questioning hall,
Yeah,
but probably to a greater degree. It seems like,
yeah,
right? Because I mean,
yeah.
I'd say it's more obvious. I mean, you have these
It's a
spinning.
similar thing. Yeah, like I mean,
Yeah.
he sits there and stares at the spinning debris or whatever and leaves, and he's able
Mhm.
to kind of start to see patterns. It's a similar thing here. And so
I think
he talks
it
about
would
like
probably be
loading on
clearer
that
with this
bridge. He's
tree.
like, why is this a good spot? And he's like, this is, an edge. It's a dangerous spot in these kind of places. These are the places where you can see these things.
Mm. And well,
And
and
so
this
they
definitely
train
is
there.
with the storms.
Yeah.
With yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
they are on an edge. They're on a mountain that cuts off the land. It's an edge. It's dangerous. They're by a dangerous tree. The storms, everything about their life is built
So that
around like
makes
they're living on the edge. And then they're training in this environment. And Kavoth is able to sense it and pick it up on it, even though it's not consciously. I don't think
well that
Rothfuss mentions that he's seen that pattern right there, and then she's making the perfect move, and then he's making the perfect move when he's sleeping mind. I think that's got to be the clue on to why they're so good.
no, I mean that would also make a lot more sense. Also, that they weren't just nomadic; they eventually landed here. You know, and I know we get that story about how they eventually landed there, but this would make all the more sense, right, as to why they would also find their place there.
And why they would choose it. Not,
Yeah,
and not even like, they just ended up there by accident. It would be the
they'd be
perfect
drawn
kind
to
of
it.
place if your purpose was to kind of master these kind of things. This would be the place you go to. This would be a place where if the sleeping mind is being triggered and you're having access to these kind of things, if you're trying to train to be a great fighter, that's the kind of place you would want to go to.
Yeah, that's a really good point. I mean, and yeah, there. I mean, that's another very important part. We know they train. We know they're fighting against the best, so it's almost like 300, right? They train for this, but it is otherworldly. I mean, the amount of speed and the lack of. I love the idea of no wasted movement, like because if you know that, if you're confident of that and you're able to do it, it makes it effortless. No
Yeah.
wonder what's her face is pushing Kavoth away and then just turning her back and very easily defending herself, because he was never a threat to begin with. It's not even
Yeah.
defending herself; it's just pushing him away.
Yeah. I mean, it would be a huge advantage if that's the kind of state you were training in. And so, I mean, it's different. And
I,
so,
I was just thinking how funny it would be if, just to troll your audience, like when that scene happens, instead of it like being all these intricate moves, it's literally just slap, 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 slap.
yeah.
They just
Yeah.
flail
Well, that's the
arms.
adaptation. Yeah. They just slap really fast.
Or
So it's a
like so.
blur, but they're just like flapping their hands in your face.
So the great defense of Cheyenne is literally just like when the kid swings his arms. You know,
Or
like little kids.
I think it's like Naked Gun where the girl goes to slap him and he catches both her arms and then a third hand comes up and smacks him in the face. He's like, "What the fuck? Where'd that come from?" Yeah. Yeah, that's the way to do it.
That make me
But
real
and
happy.
then and there's got to be an explanation for why the women would be better fighters, just because that, I mean, if because the men are getting the same training, it doesn't make any sense for the in the context of our world. There's got to be something different about them, because in the context of our world, if you had all the men and all the women training in the same way, fighting, especially fighting, the men are going to be the dominant force in that art. I mean,
Yeah,
that's just the way it
just
is. But
physically, man. It's
yeah,
just
I mean,
physicality.
it's just the way it is. Fighting is going to be the men's domain. And so if they're all getting the same training, there's got to be a reason why the women would be more dominant. And I think what helps that is maybe there's, for some reason, the women are more naturally gifted towards accessing the sleeping mind because of, their temperament is different. And so it could be something along those lines, is that in that environment that they're in, and with the different temperament that women have compared against men, is they have better access to the sleeping mind than men. And so when they're
That would
training, that
especially.
they are getting better at it than the men are, because they're better accessing the sleeping mind than the men are. So it could be something along those lines. I think that's a way you could explain it that would make sense in the context of this world.
Yeah, I mean, and obviously that especially makes sense if the sleeping mind type aspect is the key, right? If that's,
Yeah.
yeah, that makes a lot of sense.
But yeah, and then so they start fighting, and I like the fact that, like, the way they describe it is, she's like, she moved like nothing I'd ever seen. It wasn't that she was fast, though she was fast, but that was not the heart of it. Shane moved perfectly, never taking two steps when one would do, never moving 4 inches when she only needed three. She moved like something out of a story, more fluid and graceful than Florian dances. and and then when he's talking about the moves, he's like, Shane came towards me slowly, making hands like knives. I countered with catching rain, then I made climbing iron and fast inward, but could not touch her. I like it for a couple of reasons. I like, one, because of the way he uses the names. It's a way to describe fight scenes without getting in the way of the reader, and allowing the
Mm-hmm.
reader's imagination to determine the fight scene for themselves, to
Mm-hmm.
make it up in their head. Because I envision a fight when this is happening. I
Mm-hmm.
don't like get lost in the names. I envision my own fight. And so it allows you to envision your own fight, and you can make it perfect in your head, and so you're not trying to figure out what they're trying to describe. You just think of your own fight and make it in
Mm-hmm.
your head and make it perfect. And
Yeah, I
so
mean
it gives that freedom.
that's something that it's really impressive. It can seem somewhat simple for an author to make that choice, but I mean, naturally your mind would go to, all right, I'm writing a fight scene. How do I,
Mm,
he's landing a punch, he's missing. And when you read badly written fight scenes, they're horrible. Everything slows down when it's supposed to be speeding up, you know?
yeah.
And then there's just like mundane details that you're like, man, this is not, it seems like it's important and this, but then you just see a glaring example of like, this doesn't work,
Yeah.
you know?
Sanderson's really good at fight scenes, and he goes into more detail, but he also utilizes this technique as well. Is like, he's got the different fight stances and those kind of things. So
Mm-hmm.
he goes into more detail on what's happening in the fight scene, and he does a really, really good job of it. He's one of the best. but he even utilizes a similar technique that Rothfuss uses here. But we also get that that it's very similar to like Florian with her for her hands, 1,000 hands, and all those kind of euphemisms for the descriptions. So you get that kind of aspect of it, is they got kind of like a Fey type of culture, and which it gives them an ancient feel to their culture, that they describe something in the similar way that Florian describes her thing, that they do a similar thing with their fighting, and it's practical. They can talk about different fighting techniques without giving away the movements to strangers, because it would be like it's like a hidden language.
It does, yeah. It does definitely also make it seem older, right? More established, I guess, like ancient. And that in itself makes it more credible, right? It just makes it seem more, and you accept it. It's just, I mean, if you accept it, but yeah, that's kind of what it forces.
And I like the Shane took one single perfect step. Why do you weep? Shane asked as she made Heron falling. Are you ashamed? Are you in fear? I blinked my eyes to clear them. My voice was harsh from the exertion and emotion. You are beautiful, Shane, for you is in the stone of the wall, the water of the stream, and the motion of the tree in one. She blinked, and in her moment of surprise, I found myself firmly gripping her shoulder and arm. I made thunder upward, but instead of being thrown, Shane stood still and solid as a stone. But I love that fact that he catches her off guard and then just immediately tries to take advantage of the situation. Not really like thinking about it, like I'm going to fucking take a cheap shot, but he immediately tries to take a cheap shot on an old lady, which is hilarious to me. Especially given that, then shortly after this, he's fighting a 12-year-old girl and trying to take her out. Yeah, I mean, he's not above taking advantage of a situation.
Yeah, man. In an instant, she becomes intensely powerful.
Yeah, she's just absent-mindedly. She freed herself with break lion and made threshing wheat. I flew 6 feet and hit the ground. But then not only that, but he was like, she did it in a gentle tossing of 6 feet, where I'm not going to get jacked up. She gently tossed me 6 feet.
Well, and because we were told before she never gets touched, and he's not getting close. He's getting somewhat close, but clearly he's not going to be able to touch her.
He's getting as close as she's willing to let him.
Yeah. And once she grips his shoulder and arm, reading the first time, you're not sure. I was like, oh shit, Kavoth is amazing. He can do everything perfectly, right? Because you're kind of thinking, well, maybe he is quick. And of course that gets baited back. But in this, instead of being thrown, Shane stood still and solid as a stone. And then that's when, she breaks through and throws him 6 feet in the air.
Yeah.
But gently.
Yeah, gently tosses you 6 feet. Yeah, and then she explains, that Tempe has both taught you and not taught you, which is both bad and good. And then she shows him gives him one of the leaves, which shows you he cuts himself on the leaf, and you see that these things are like almost like razor blades that are falling. I mean, they're extremely dangerous. He's able to just cut himself by touching this tree. It's that sharp and that hard. These are heavy leaves that are broad and flat, but it's not regular leaves. This is a completely different type of tree. It's foreign from our world. And where does it come from? Why is this tree like that? Why is there only one tree? And why is it in a spot that is like on an edge where they got this great fighting skills that they're able to develop? And Kavoth is able to kind of develop it by practicing with them there. And, and then he's accessing his naming and seeing the wind and all this. And they got a greystone that's in their like fighting area. Like, it seems like, is this a tree from the Fae? Is this like a creation of a shaper? Because this seems different.
Yeah, I mean, 100%. It doesn't have that smell like Rowan, right?
Yeah.
Because we were getting that for a while. And it's interesting. I mean, it comes not long after the Cathay, too. It's like, man, what's with all these trees? Like, there's something going on here. Like, this ever-present power in the world within nature itself. But yeah, the tree, I mean, fucking murder tree, dude. Yeah. Crazy ass murder tree. It's nuts.
Extremely dangerous. and then she goes in to explain like why he taught him but didn't teach him. So she's basically like, he showed you these movements, but he didn't tell you, how to utilize them properly and how to take advantage of them. Whereas she's like, you don't know where to attack. Like, do you attack the root or the branch, or or the leaf or the branch? And he's like, you attack the branch. And she's like, okay, but you don't know where the branch is on the body. Like, you don't hit the legs, you don't go at the arms, you go at the shoulder and the hips, and you get people off balance and spin them. So she kind of explains to him how to fight, and he sees it. And so, like, she's like, I thought for a long moment. She asked her, like, where on my body is a weakness? And he's like, I thought for a long moment, then tapped her knee. Though she gave no sign of it, I sensed her surprise, and I tapped the opposite side under her armpit, then her shoulder. She's like, show me. I came in close to her, set one leg close against her knee, and made thunder upward, throwing her to the side. I was surprised at how little force was required. However, instead of being thrown into the air to tumble to the ground, Shane gripped my forearm. I felt a jolt run up my arm and was pulled one staggering step to the side. Rather than being thrown, Shane used her grip as leverage, so her feet came down beneath her. She took a single perfect step in her balance and had her balance again. Shane looked me straight in the eye for a long speculative moment, then turned to leave, gesturing for me to follow. So he passes the first step with her.
She's a beast. Dude.
Yeah.
She's a fucking beast.
Yeah, and I think the if you look at it from the perspective of they're like, it's a sleeping mind guided type of fighting, then I think it becomes easier to wrap your head around why they're so good. Because just training alone, yeah, if you have the proper technique and the other person doesn't, like if you're practicing MMA and they're just randomly practicing, you're probably gonna fucking whoop their ass. But they're beating 4-on-1, 5-on-1, and just whooping the shit out of people. And unless you're like watching some unrealistic Batman movie, where he's just dominating 10 dudes, that doesn't happen. Like maybe you get lucky once every now and again, but you're not consistently going up against 5-on-1 odds and winning. You're getting fucking whooped in those situations. There's too many people.
Well, and also we see it with Tempe. They have no qualms about challenging people.
No, right? Yeah, to the point that he's like, it's preposterous that 2 or 3 people could beat me.
Yeah, well, and also considering people know how to fight.
Yeah,
right. There are going to be people in that room that are going to know how to fight, but he knows none of them are of the Adem. So it's like, well, whatever.
Yeah, it's an advanced, a majorly advanced level that they're fighting at, and so there's got to be a reason on it. You can go and just suspend disbelief. Like, I don't watch Batman movies and be like, it's unrealistic. No way. He would have got dominated in that fight. Like, they all had guns. There's like 10 of them with guns. It doesn't make any sense.
You yell this out at the theater?
Yeah, I don't do that. So, like, I suspend disbelief when I go and see Batman movies. So you could do that. But Rothfuss tends to have an explanation for why he makes the decisions that he makes. So I tend to look for them and try to figure out ways, given the context of the world, that would make sense. And to me, it makes more sense to say that there's some kind of naming aspect to the world than to just suspend disbelief. I don't think it's necessary to suspend disbelief in that way. I think you can come up with explanations, given the magic of the world, to explain why they would be so supernaturally good at fighting.
Well, the tree definitely says a lot. It's highly suggestive that there's something going on here. We don't hear about this anywhere else. For the longest time, I like, for whatever reason, well, I know why, because they're kind of close together. For the longest while, I confused the Cathay being in this tree.
So yeah, there's only a couple prominent trees, so.
And the chapters are somewhat close together.
Yeah.
Kind of in that area.
Yeah, but as time goes by, the details kind of bleed together. But yeah, but those trees would stick out. But yeah, and so, but and there's going to be more I'm going to want to dive into, because I think, once you get into the 99 stories and how old their swords are, and when the swords were used, like in the Battle of Drazen Tor, the sword that Kavoth it was used in the Battle of Drazen Tor, and that wasn't even the first person to hold it. So that's the Creation War. This sword was used during the Creation War and before that, before the Creation War. So like the Adem swords go way the fuck back before the stealing of the moon. And so like there's aspects to the Adem that we'll dive into further when we start getting into their 99 stories and their swords and that kind of stuff. But this is a rich area for speculation on what the hell's going on with these worlds, and just this culture alone, there's a lot to speculate about them. So it's gonna be fun as we go along. I think next time we're gonna run into the end of this interaction where Shane will decide to give him a chance. She puts him under Vachette, and so he's gonna go meet Vachette and hand her a stick to beat him down with. I mean, I love the first time he's like going and getting the best stick, kind of like he does with the acorns or whatever that the pine cones that Elodin wanted.
Yeah.
It's like, and then he's getting there like the perfect stick, and then she uses it to fucking whip him with it.
Yeah, it's pretty funny, man. It's it starts out pretty brutal for him. You know, he's finally got here, and you know, seems like he's doing okay with Shane in that first circumstance. But yeah, they just beat him down.
Yeah, especially because he's going there to protect one of their own. Like he's not going there to steal their magic fighting skills. He's going there to protect Tempe, one of them, and they're treating him like shit. And you know, and there's reasons, it's understandable, and they don't trust him, so he's got to earn it. But it's you know, being in Kavoth's head, it's hard to watch him being beaten down when he's being an extremely good person.
Yeah, I'd have some trouble with that. I'm not real good with you know, someone yelling, even not even yelling at me.
No, I
something
would
rude,
not be a fan of
let alone
whipping.
getting
That would
hit.
not be my thing. I would not be cool with you whipping me or anybody whipping me. I'd be opposed to it.
I would be opposed. Okay, yeah. Well, that kind of goes without saying, but all right.
But yeah, and then so I was like, you know, I sat in a tiny park composed of nothing more than 2 smooth stone benches, a handful of trees, and a small path running through the long grass. You could walk from one edge to the other in a minute. There were cliffs close on 2 sides, sheltering it from the wind. Not out of the wind, mind you. There didn't seem to be anywhere in Ulvhart entirely out of the wind, which makes it a really good place for naming.
Yeah.
You're on kind of a wild edge, like Elodin talked about, where it's kind of a wild area. It's an untamed area. And so I think that's significant that he's able to gain access and start to take that next step in his naming ability once he's here. Once he discovers Spinning Leaf and he's here, he kind of starts taking that next step in the evolution of his naming. I think that's significant to kind of understanding what is up with the Adem, why they're better fighters, why the women might be better fighters than the men. And, you know, they're explaining like the swords, how they don't seem to break or be marred. They just kind of maintain. And then like the naming prowess of their naming process when they go and you get your name, you get your sword, and the rituals, and their training ground is by a gravestone. Got the 99 stories. You got the story about the Chandrian. So I think there's significance to all that, and is pointing to the Adem being a very old society that has been around for a long, long time, even though the rest of the world doesn't know a lot about them. I think that's because of their isolation, but I think they've been around passing stories down for a long, long time.
It does. Well, one thing that Kavoth does have in common with that is he is a traditionalist, very much so. Like he respects tradition of stories, and it's always 3 things, and all of those things. What came to mind in the moment where you're reading that part, or you mentioned about this being a wild place. Do you remember what some of the things Elodin said to Kavoth when he was on the bridge with him about go find
an edge? He's like asked him, you know, do you know why this is a good spot.
Yeah, yeah.
And he's like, because it's an edge or something like that. It's like it's basically it's a wild area, a dangerous area. It's an untamed area.
But I thought he also mentioned like when he knew Kavoth was leaving, and I thought he gave him like some sort of like instruction, sort of, where it was like go find.
Go to the edge of the map or something like that. And he's like, because like
Yeah,
when he gets back,
because that's
he's like,
kind of what he
you really
does.
did go to the edge of the map.
Yeah, yeah, because I mean that is kind of what he does. And so he is in a wild place, but he's also near like the edge of things. So he's out there. He's doing it. He's doing what was instructed of him. And I guess
Because
again, that coming from a Loden is meaningful because Loden's tapped into shit.
yeah, and
He
why
knows
why
his
would the
history.
Adem still be there? Like it does not seem to be like an hospitable living environment.
Well, and
So
it's not real
why are they still there? They're
practical.
wealthy.
Well,
They
it's
got
not. It's
wealth.
it's also not very practical if the sustainability of their culture is we need to send guys out to go do jobs in all these places. Well, they're all far as shit, it
Yeah.
seems. So that's not real practical to that aspect. So yeah, it does seem like there's definitely more going there. I don't know. I don't know
Obviously,
exactly
they
what
want to
that
be
looks like.
away. They want to be away from everybody else, but it's a big world. Like, is that really like the only spot? I think because of the naming aspect and the perfect step. Kavoth feeling like he's taking the perfect step when he's called after Sleeping Mind takes over and he names the win. He feels like he's moving like Cheyenne. I think those are all significant and pointing to the fact that they probably chose this place specifically. And with the tree and with the Greystone by the training area, I think they have. And you think about just the things that they told Kavoth, like the 99 stories, and then the history of the sword, and the story that she tells about the Chandrian. I imagine that they're not fully divulging most of what they know to Kavoth. So I'm guessing that they probably have a pretty rich understanding of the previous generations of the world, and they probably have a good grasp of why they pick this specific place and why they stay there in a
So
place that's not very hospitable. And so you would think that there's got to be something significant that that would tie into their fighting ability and the Lithani and all that kind of stuff. That there's a reason that's probably, especially with how central the Lithani is to their lifestyle. You would think that they probably chose this specific place has something to do with the Lithani and the Sleeping Mind and the Name of the Wind and the Edge and that kind of the Greystones and the tree and all that stuff's all tied together.
I wonder then. So it's a place where people can be more adept in taking on these powers, or they can be more. It's more likely that they can get, because when you think about like the Hall of the Wind, right, and places that like where Elodin's like this is a good place for watching, like those types of things, it can tip a mind into being able to see things that they can't see otherwise, right? Or
But
they
yeah,
or
and you
or
think about it
they're
like,
more likely to see it in those areas.
yeah, and like Elodin, when he's sitting there, he's kind of like in a meditative state when he's sitting on those. He knows the Name of the Wind, but he likes to sit there, kind of meditate on it, and just like kind of live with it. And it seems like if you're in an environment like the like Lone likes to go and visit there, if you lived in that environment, you just lived in a place that was like that, the Hall of the Wind, you lived in a place that you had that just it's a wild area where you would have access to that magic. It's a place where it's easier to tap into that,
Mm-hmm.
into the Sleeping Mind, that by living there and working out there and training there and meditating there, that it would change you. It would have an impact on your training and all those kind of things, where you would be training in a way where you have access to the Sleeping Mind, so it enhances things.
And it kind of almost makes me wonder if there something in the wind, is there something in the water, is there something in the air, in this area? Like, is there something literally in this part of the world that encourages those abilities, like that enhances those abilities. The culture is huge because obviously they're all focused on it. So all those minds focusing together, that's going to create better fighter. It's not just that they're good fighters though; it's that they have this speed and the ability to those perfect steps, right? I mean, yeah, that's training, but there seems to be more to it than that, right? So, and like Kavos walked to the tree, right? I mean, that seems to be there's more to it than just like, oh, I picked it up in training, right? It's not like that. So, yeah, I don't know. Maybe it's that old bloodline. I mean, there seems to be this thing that is in Kavoth, that he respects tradition, who his parents were, how he's lived his life, all the things that he's picked up, all the things he's learned, that he then gets to incorporate these abilities that others just don't have access to. You also have, it seems, that some of that in people in the Ademra, right? And Elodin has some of that. So I guess it's I don't know. It's those experiences that, I don't know. So when I say that bloodline, where I was going with that is, if they're as old as the world is, their culture is as old as the world is, then they're the inheritors of this, so they would be more tapped into it. So they would
Yeah,
have abilities that others in
and
the world don't.
they're very isolated. I mean, it could be that it's a specific purpose too. Like they don't want to dilute those bloodlines that tie back to the Ruach or something along those lines. But it seems like there's more to the story than it. I don't believe that the answer is simply going to be like a Batman type of thing where he goes and learns special you know special karate or jujitsu or whatever from the League of Assassins, and that's why he can go and kick the shit out of everybody. Because I mean, that doesn't make any sense. It's not realistic at all. Like, I mean, you're not just gonna go and fucking train and become the greatest. Like even the best MMA fighter in the world. If he's not like just a absolute giant, he's still, you get 8-on-1, you're getting overwhelmed. I mean, you're eventually you run into numbers, and you can have all the training in the world, but you only got 2 fists and 2 feet. So, if you're fighting 4 or 5 dudes, you're going to be in trouble if they all come at you at the same time. They're going to take you to the ground and beat the shit out of you.
Unless you have a lightning tree.
Yeah. So,
Right.
but when you're talking about a fantasy world, you don't need to do that. You don't need to have like I have this special training. You can make it a magical thing where it's like you can make it about the sleeping mind and that kind of stuff, because you've built this world where that is obviously extremely important. So why wouldn't you incorporate that into the world, and use that to explain why the women would be better fighters? Because it's just, realistically, if the men and women are all training the same way, the men are going to be significantly better fighters. That's just, that's the way it is. I mean, you could put 2 men and women same size. If they're training in MMA, the man's going to be way better.
I mean,
if they're similar athletic abilities and everything, all you strip away all the main differences. Like you just basically take 2 men and women that are fairly similar from a starting point. The man's going to be the better fighter.
Well, I was going to say, unless in your world you've created, they're biologically different.
Yeah, that's what I mean.
But they're not in the book we're reading. So in this book,
well, I mean, maybe they are. It's not talked about. That's what. But I'm saying, when you're talking about a fantasy, you have the opportunity to write in explanations. Because if there is no explanation, and like if Rothfuss was just like, no, it's just, the women just happen to be better fighters, and it's like, okay, well then, and there's nothing biologically different, there's no magical thing going on. It's like, well, then you just don't understand fighting at all. Like you should have talked to some fighters. Like you should have talked to some women and men, like in boxing or in the UFC, to understand that there's a physical difference, a massive one. It's not a slight one. It's a massive gap.
Yeah.
So there's got to be some kind, when you, to suspend disbelief, like that's one thing. Like I suspend it when I watch comic book movies, but it's not necessary to. I mean, you can, because I've already accepted that there's magic in this world, so why wouldn't you utilize that to give answers to
Mm.
things like this? So I think that's why when I look, like, why are they better fighters? Why are the women better fighters than the men? I look for answers in the magic system, because that seems to be the cleaner way to go, and without making it just stripping away some of the believability of the story, because he like the way he describes sympathy, it's such a system that he makes it seem believable, that it's you obviously have to suspend disbelief. It's magic, but
Mm-hmm.
he grounds that magic. And so if he's not grounding why they're so good at fighting, why the women are better at fighters, like if he's not grounding that in something in the world, then it's just like, what are you doing, man? Like, why did you, like, why wouldn't you do that? Why wouldn't you
Mm-hmm.
utilize the world you created in the magic system to explain these things? It just seems like it'd be stupid not to. So that's
So,
why I look for answers there.
but we don't have a clear 100% answer
No.
at this point. Yeah, yeah. It is interesting. I mean, it's clearly. Well, I shouldn't say it's clearly. It's definitely not just training. It's that you seeing what Tempe's able to do, and then applying that to like even what Shane's able to do, who's on a completely different level. It's not. Yeah, there's something else going on. It seems right than just training and fighting, and especially like you said with the swords that don't dull, right? They
Yeah.
don't break. They last forever, and their stories and the mythology that they're tapped into and all that belief. It seems like belief in stories in this world give you power, right? Because belief in the stories awaken something within. It's not just the sleeping mind, as far as I'm concerned. The way that I see it is, it is beyond that. It's sort of, I mean, it's all about stories within stories with this series, and yeah, as far as I can tell, it does much more than just awakening a sleeping mind. It awakens, like it unlocks the power of the ruach. I don't know. I
Yeah.
don't know. It's hard to really pinpoint
Yeah,
because
I'm
it's
curious if
speculative
we will
anyway.
get an
But
answer, because I mean he's left the Adem now, so like I mean you would think the only way he's going to get more answers on that is if he runs into someone from the Adem in book 3. I don't think he's
we get
coming
to the
back.
tall. Maybe we
I
get to
don't
the
thi-
tall.
Maybe, but I think
That's
if
not
he
this way.
does, it's likely he's traveling through waystones. I don't think he's doing the same travel again over boat and all that. I mean, unless he just
Mm.
completely glosses over, like I spent 6 months traveling there, but I don't think there's going to be a situation where he goes back to Dimray and is hanging out there again and getting more answers from them. I would be surprised. Maybe he does that, but again, I think if he does, he's skipping. He's just going to pass over the time it takes to
I was gonna
travel there,
say it does seem a
or
little
he
odd.
travels through waystones.
It does seem a little odd given all the lessons and stories and all the things that came out of it. Seems a little odd that he just dipped back in just to, hey guys,
Yeah.
what's going on?
So
Like,
but that makes
what?
me like I'm not sure that we're going to get answers on these things. It might be something that we continue to talk about and debate about. He might just some of these things he's not going to give answers to. It's like you don't have answers to everything in our own world, and so you're not going to get
Yeah.
answers to everything. But it's still it's interesting to talk about, and to try to puzzle out and try to think of what route he could go and how he could explain the things. But I don't know if we'll get an answer to this specific question, and why their society is kind of exactly why it's the way it is. I think, but I do think we'll get more answers on the Adem. They're too mysterious at this point. I think he's got to explain a little bit more about why they are the way they are. But we'll see. I
Perhaps
don't know
it
if we'll
it
get.
is it is a ways out there. I mean, just in terms of like just it does stand out as very different than the rest of the world,
Yeah, yeah,
and
it's
in that
100%
sense,
different.
it gives him he comes out of it with some tremendous lessons and abilities and understanding and larger verification of important stories. So I could see it just being kind of put on ice, or like basically it's tied up and done. But I don't know, maybe not. I mean, I think it would probably make more sense that it's not necessarily. I don't know how. Like I keep kind of trying to picture a culmination, sort of for book
Like
three,
I could
which
see like
he's
he
not
runs
just
into
gonna.
Tempe or something, like
Well,
that.
I don't. One thing I don't see him doing, but I keep picturing is like this possibility is like the whole band is together and they
Yeah.
all go to the doors of
Yeah,
stone. Like it's
let's
not
see
gonna
that.
happen.
Yeah.
It's just not gonna. It doesn't. It's
Do the
not his
Fellowship of the
style.
Rings.
Yeah, it's not. It's not his. I don't see that being his style, but I do see a lot of people that we've read about playing a part,
Yeah.
right? And their part gets played in the way that it's going to get played. But yeah, Tempe and Puppet are just gonna start hanging out.
Yeah.
They're gonna move in
Yeah.
together, and
Yeah.
they're gonna start a bed and breakfast.
Yeah,
And
they all meet up. He calls everybody he's hung out with, they all meet in the same place. And then they, hang out and make a plan together. And they all talk about everything out in the open. Kavoth tells all his secrets.
I think Tempe and Puppet's actually not a bad mix because Tempe like uses a sword with wood. So he'll make puppets for him.
Rothfuss spends like 200 pages where he like sits every character down in a room and then just has Kavoth and all the characters ask questions and give explanations to explain all the different secrets.
They do like a real world thing where they just do an individual interview with the chronicler just to verify stories. So we're finishing up the story.
They just
here,
each person takes a turn in a chair and they sit there and everybody gets to ask that person questions. Kavoth tells all about all the bad things that's happened to him. So yeah, that's how he's gonna give all the answers.
Oh, you know what I do like about this is every character gets to be like, wait, what do you say? No. That's not how it happened. Yeah. This fucking guy.
Yeah.
And Florian sits down. And she's like, no, absolutely not. Did this happen?
No, he was terrible. Terrible. He thinks I suffice? Well, guess what? You did not suffice. It was not nice. It sucked. I knew immediately you were a virgin. I knew when you came running up with your stupid cloak on, I was like, yeah, he's wearing a cloak. He's clearly a virgin.
You didn't know where things went? Oh, man. It's
like, that's not it.
That turned into a really funny idea. Yeah, I like it.
But, and then so he asks Bichette, you didn't grow up here? She shook her head. I'm from Faint, a town farther north. We're more cosmopolitan. Hair has the one school and everyone is tied very tightly to it. The sword tree is one of the old paths too, rather formal. I grew up following the path of joy. So you got these different schools, these different paths, and the different personalities of the different little cities or towns.
Mm-hmm. Well,
so theirs is more cosmopolitan. But the fact that Hert is old school and it follows one of the old paths and it's formal also, I think, lends towards the fact that I was talking about, like with the sleeping mind, and they're in a wild area, in a wild spot where seeing the name of the wind is easier, and those kind of things where they're tapping into that kind of sleeping mind thing. I think that's also lends towards that idea that the fact that Hart is more old school than cities a little bit further north that are more cosmopolitan and becoming more
integrated into society,
integrated to the rest of the world. And so
this is more in tune with the old stories, and what we're about to find out, and then
the old powers too, and that kind of stuff. They're the best ones with the sword, and those kind of things where it's like, I think there's something to it, that the fact that they got the sword tree and the wind and the wildness, and Kavoth seeing the name of the wind, they're taking the Shayan taking the perfect step, Kavoth taking the perfect step when he sees the name of the wind. I think there's something to that.
That's an interesting thing to consider, because from what they mention here, it sounds like there's 36 branches. There's like 36 different schools.
Mm-hmm.
So the idea of like this is old and formal and they stick to the code and all that type of stuff, I mean, that kind of suggests that some of these other schools, they water it down, right? And if you water it down, the step wouldn't, I mean, it kind of lends to the idea that the step wouldn't be as perfect, right? That the fighting might not be as crisp or what have you, whatever adjectives you want to use. That idea of it being watered down because they stick to the code more. tightly, right? And it's more formal and it's older. It's closer to the stories. To me, that lends more strength to it. I mean, we don't get a lot of evidence that these other schools aren't as good. That's not what's being said here, right?
Well, she does. She specifically says that this is the best place to go to learn the sword.
Oh, okay.
So, I mean, she's saying that, that's why she came here, because of the reputation
Oh,
that they
that's
have.
right. Yeah, yeah, yeah. Yeah, that's right. Yeah, so she grew up with the Path of Joy. Is that what it was?
Yeah, she
Yeah.
went Path Jordan, and she's like, there's other schools. This is one of the many schools that follows the Latanta, the path of the sword tree. It's one of the oldest, behind the eighth in Eratan. There are other paths, maybe 3 dozen, but some of those are very small, with only 1 or 2 schools teaching their Katan. Is that why your sword is different? Did you bring it from your other school? Vishak gave me a narrow look. What do you mean? What do you know of my sword? And he points out that she had used it when she was trimming the willow switch, and she's like, well, you're certainly paying attention.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
But she's like, strictly speaking, it's not my sword. It's merely in my keeping. It's an old sword, and the blade is the oldest part of it. It was given to me by Shayan herself. So she's talking about, like, this isn't the oldest school, but it's one of the oldest schools. But they're using swords that date all the way back, predate the Battle of Drazen Tor. So, and she's talking about eighth is a school that's older than them, and Eratan. That would
That's
be, if,
wild.
unless, I mean, it could be the case that they've got their swords after all this shit, and like these are swords that have like came back into their possession or something like that. Or it could mean that, like, the story of Eighth and Wraith, like the 99 stories,
Mm-hmm.
predates the the block of Drazen Tor, goes all the way back to the Ruach time, before the war, before the creation war.
So that also, so that it seems like the way the stories work in this world, that would also lend much greater strength, right? If
Mm.
it's that it goes that far back, because it seems to be a big part of the themes in the book is that the more in tap with the stories you are, or a group is, the more strength they're able to gain from it. I don't know. So it seems to me.
Yeah, well, I mean, the idea that they can trace the lineage of these swords all the way back to the beginning, to the first owner, is significant, because
Pretty astounding.
how would they do that if they had lost chain of custody of the swords at some point? So it seems like this has been a pretty straight line for this school. They've been around for at least predating the, I think that's the more likely scenario than something like, they discovered these swords, somewhere along the line. They found the swords, and they just, there's a book that listed who owned the swords before that, or something along those lines. So it seems like these are swords that they've had in their possession for over 5,000 years. And this school has been around for over 5,000 years. And then if Eighth predates that, you got the story of the 99 stories predates their school. That means we're talking about that the Adem are coming all the way from the Ruach, and that the 99 stories is a story of during the time of the Ruach, not a time of man and Fae.
Yeah, so there's definitely a lot going on in this area, where they are,
There,
why they've been here as long as they've been, right?
yeah, there's something significant going on, because just the fact that their swords are predate the creation war is significant in its own right, because of the fact that they know who's owned the swords
Well,
that whole time. That
it's
shows that it's been, in their possession likely the whole time. So if you're dating the Adem all the way back to pre-creation war, then it's also lending credence to the Ademaru being a branch of the Ruach. And so you got the Ruach, the Adem, the Edema, like their names all kind of tie in with
Mhm.
each other. And I think this is given a lot of evidence towards the fact that these are people that started from 5,000 plus years ago, before man and before Fae. And the Ademaru and the Adem have been around for thousands of years, and they were involved in that group of the most powerful people that there were. And And I think they're likely when they talk about like some of the people became angels, some of the people became Amir, and then there's the third batch of Ruach that didn't join either group and they went their own way. I think that third batch, that's where you get the current Adem, the current Edema Ru, Tinkers, that kind of stuff. Florian. I think that's where you get, those Ruach went out and went their own way, and some went to the Fae, some went to, stayed in the mortal world, became mortals, and I think, likely the thing that has changed them from man to Fae is something to do with the moon, and now that it's not in one place, it goes from place to place. I think the shifting of the moon and the environments that they live in changed them to man and to Fae.
It seems like the creation war was sent huge ripples through the world, right? Like that's when there was a big shift.
Yeah,
Right.
that's the linchpin of the whole story as far
Yeah.
as Haliax and the Amir and all that. I mean, the story that Kavoth is chasing, it's the center of it is the creation war.
Yeah.
But it's not like the Adem talk about fighting in the creation war. When she tells the stories, she tells it, like that they're not,
It
you
didn't.
know, they're not like that's not the center part of their story. Like we fought against the seven, or there's no story. She doesn't tell the story like that. Like
Mm-hmm.
we're on one side and the other people are on the other. She just tells the story of what they did, and kind of sounds like, she doesn't put them in the story themselves. So I think it's likely that they were just more, rather than being a someone like a Scarpy or a Haliax or Lanre and Lyra. Like, I think that they were likely maybe soldiers in the war, but they weren't out there trying to fight this war. I don't think this was the Adem war, and I think that's likely why when you have Ruach that didn't join the Angels or the Amir, it's probably because this wasn't their war. They might have been fighting in it and lost people and that kind of stuff, but it doesn't seem like this is their passion in life is to right the wrongs of this war.
It's really interesting that he mentions, and I guess it makes sense, but he mentions the handle is worn, but the blade looks new because she says basically the opposite.
Yeah.
The blade is the oldest part of it. I love the idea. It's merely in her keeping, and we find that out, and we learn the story behind that. But yeah, it's a really cool tradition that they have. I mean, talk about like elevating your position, right? Or having a reason to respect and have respect for your position within their world is like you inherit a sword that's been used by warriors for thousands of years. It's pretty wild, man. And
Yeah.
then everything that goes along with it, all that memorization and how important all that has to be understood and respected for the lineage of the sword in itself. Yeah, it's cool, man. It's really cool mythology to like throw into the world, to build it out.
Yeah, and I mean the when you tie in, the little pieces of information you get, it shows, that this is one of the ancient races, that's been around a lot longer than, the mayor and his family. And
Well,
so those
it's
kind of things, it's like they definitely seem to predate that. And they have the fact that they can trace their swords all the way back. They have all these stories, the 99 stories. They know about the Chandrian. They have stories about them. They know their true names. They've likely got access to information that is just not, you're not going to find in most parts of the world. This is one of those kind of special places where these are an old race of people that have been around a long time from the beginning. They have access to information that he couldn't find anywhere else. If he had stayed longer and trained with them, he could have perhaps, became, more established in their community. Probably would have gained a lot of valuable information about the history of the world there.
I was going to say it's one thing to have this old like lineage and all these different bloodlines throughout and that go back so far, but to also be so in tune with like their history as they are is
Yeah.
really interesting. I can have all this respect for it and how it's a big part of their world in itself. Like they're carrying on that past moving forward. it's a really cool way to, distinct them from others, from other races in the world. It's great. I mean, it builds out the world in such a big way as well. It's one thing to have this other location and other types of language, but to go even further and to build like the history of the world that's completely separate from like the Chandri and the Haley accent. They still talk about it, and it's a huge part of it, but the Eighth and Wraith thing is like completely separate.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean they're very different. They have access to information that you can't find. I mean they're extremely unique, and you just wish he would have stayed longer and dug for more nuggets of information, because obviously they have a rich, long past, and they seem to know it pretty well. But they keep it pretty secret. They're not spreading this information around the world.
Well, yeah, that's another part of it that's really interesting, and we kind of get that within Kovoth being there. It's like he's hearing these stories for the first time. We haven't even heard snippets from other things, and he's one of those guys that he's getting stories. I don't think he didn't hear this from his father, and his father knows all kinds of stories, right? So I am interested to see what old Cobb would do to the Eighth and Wraith story. How some of those individual things would change.
Well, Eighth and Wraith are named Eight and Bathy, and they got mad because old Eight ate one of Bathy's apples, and a demon popped out of it, and that demon ate one of Eight's babies. So it gets real serious real quick.
Wow.
And so he shot a lightning arrow through the heart of old Eight. Got shot through through
Bathy.
Yeah, Bathy. Yeah, it's a very confusing story. It doesn't make a lot of sense. He doesn't do a good job with it.
Well, he does it like we were talking on one of the past episodes. Like that remix is typically not as good as the original.
Remix.
Oh, that's what
that would make his story so much better. Yeah, like if Jake was doing that as he's like telling the story, he's just sitting there going remix.
He's in the back.
And or Kovoth does it. Kovoth every time old Cobb starts telling a story about Kovoth and he's mixing it all up, Kovoth comes out of the kitchen being like remix. And they're like, "Why do you always do that when I tell Kovoth stories?"
I love it. He just comes out and he's like, "DJ Cobb."
Yeah.
I love the idea that, and then old Cobb every time just turns like pissed off, like, dude, what are you doing? Why are you interrupting my story? It's like, no, I'm adding color to it, just as you are.
Yeah,
or you're completely butchering all of it and acting like you know everything. Yeah, and it's interesting. What you're mentioning is really what he's getting at is like, okay, so but what is all this for? Like, you guys it's just violence. That's what we're doing here. This is what we prioritize.
Yeah.
That's kind of like, that's what his questions are getting at, right?
Yeah. Yeah, he's like, to what purpose are you teaching me? If Tempe was wrong to teach me, why continue to teach me more? And she's like, I've been wondering how long it would take you to ask that. But then she goes, you know things you should not. Cheyenne does not mind that you know of the Luthani, though others feel differently, but there is agreement on the subject of our Khatan. It is not for barbarians. It is only for the Adem and only for those who follow the path of the sword tree. So, like, the technique itself is essential, but that can't be all it is. There's got to be more to it than just they have this special fighting style. That if you know this special fighting style, because that doesn't exist. There's not like some special secret fighting style that would make you capable of taking on 4 dudes the size of Day-Dan.
Yeah, it's not like they're like reinventing physics, right? It's a larger, it's the Luthani, right? So what I think is really interesting.
Like the way they move is like they have precognition. It's like where the punches are gonna go. Like they talk about like when Cheyenne fights Penta and she's taking like the perfect amount of steps back to just barely avoid the sword tip, and like just the perfected movements, like that's not something you can just practice and you can do, because like the movements, the sword strikes, the punches, all that stuff it's not robotic.
Yeah.
It's
Yeah.
not
It's
like
not, you're not
fighting
doing
Tyson on
steps.
Punch Out. You know,
Yeah.
it's the things, it varies. You know, they can change.
That's one of the things about, all right. So that's what I was going to mention. There's a few things there. So I've been wondering how long it would take you to ask that. It should have been one of your first questions. So you start to realize like they have like somewhat of an agenda in mind that he should be moving towards. It's a lot of like questioning things, seeing things in a certain way, seeing what is the Lethani, that sort of thing, and seeing that there's an overall. That's why this is such an important question. It's why she says you should have asked this before, because now we're getting to the real meat of things. When you talk about the K-Tan, yeah, it's not, when you first hear about it, you could picture, oh, it's like downward dog, and then all these other positions that they do in an order. But it's not really, because what it is it's like the form of the movement, right? It's like they're solidifying their muscles. It's like giving the muscle memory to be able to move properly. There
Yeah,
seems to be something, what I've started to realize and what I pick up in this chapter is it seems quite a bit like the name of the wind, but I don't know what to call it. Like you said before, this place seems to be close to whatever this magic is. It seems to be
yeah,
accessible in this place. Maybe because it's by the Stormwall Mountains. Maybe it's because of how the wind moves all over. But we get from the Wraith and Eighth, whatever story of the wind. It's all over the place. It's not just one direction or anything. So it's highly unpredictable, but then predictable. It's like they can see a pattern in it, and then it, like you mentioned, precognition. Maybe that's close to what it is, but I don't know. It seems to be like they're seeing the rhythm in things, and by seeing the rhythm in things,
yeah. Well, because you see when Kavoth sees the name of the wind and he's walking through those leaves and he's stepping around them and he's using the Katan to step around these things, and he's taking the perfect step, not, taking one step when, not taking two steps, but taking one when only one's necessary. Like doing those type of things where he's moving exactly out of the way of the leaf. But the reason he's able to do that is because he knows exactly where the leaf is going to fall. He sees the pattern of what is going to happen. So it is like a precognition. If you know that if it falls from here and it's going to land here, like, I mean, that is a certain level of precognition. It's an intuition more
that
than like precog, but it's like an intuition at a magical level.
it
And
seems.
so like the fact Shane's able to do that too, like I don't think that's training. I think that's magic.
It feels like, in a way, the Matrix, and it feels like, in a
Yeah.
way, when he sees the name of the wind, when he sees it with Felorian, and knowing, like, understanding the names of things, understanding like because
Yeah,
you
it's a
get that
hundred. I
sort
mean,
of
he's 100.
control.
He calls the name of the wind
Mm-hmm.
when he does that. He sees the name of the
So
wind when he does that. So
so
yeah,
can
it's 100% him
so
knowing the name of the wind.
so considering that, they're kind of what they're doing is like Elodin is doing his version of what they're doing
Yeah.
in a way, right? It's
Well,
like it's
it
opening
seems to
up your
be.
mind.
Yeah, it seems to be a sleeping mind. Like it be the way they talk about, like there's the sleeping mind and then there's the waking mind, and the waking mind would seem like, you're learning all these movements and, you're learning a great fighting style. But with the sleeping mind would be like to take that information, that ability that you have, and just enhance it to levels that you just couldn't normally reach because of your intuition is, you see the world and you see how things are going to unfold at a level that is just not possible with your waking mind. So like it's that combination of the training plus the sleeping mind enhancing your training and taking it to another level. And so I'm betting part of the reason like Cheyenne is so good is she's probably much more in tune with her sleeping mind
Mm-hmm.
than someone else that is just starting
You,
out.
you know what's interesting about that? She seems very innocent with the hat and the way she speaks, and like, you know what I'm saying? Like she seems to hold on. She's presented as having this innocence. Like Elodin has that innocence, just childlike,
Yeah.
right? There's certain ways that the two of them act or speak. At least that's what I get. I get an impression of like this childlike sort of intuitive or innocent nature that children have, that they still have tapped into, that we have access to, but we forget because we're worried about taxes and who we're voting for and this BS, fucking mowing the lawn and shit. But I think what this is also driving at is also, so going through the motions and learning the Catan and being on the fringes of understanding is where Kavoth's still a barbarian, right? They still view him as a barbarian, even though he has some of this access to information. He's a barbarian. And then when they talk about, Vachette talks about the pride that she has in wearing the red, those are the people that have started to access, right? They've gotten to that level of proving themselves in their fighting styles with one another, but then also through the conversations, again, just imagining, because it seems like that's the way it goes, through their conversations with Cheyenne, showing that they understand the Lethani, and then that they are worthy of being part of the Ademre, which includes or is sort of encompassed with all of that. And Vichette's extraordinarily prideful about it. And it seems like she should be, and the rest of them are as well, because it takes a lot of work, takes a lot of focus, and they sort of see the world in a completely different way. They're very serious, right? They're very serious, but then it's funny because then when they engage in like sex, it's like, it's such an interesting mix for Rothfuss to throw in there, because they're like very serious and then have no qualms about things. And then, musicianship comes in. It's like very serious and prudish would be the thought, right?
Because they're very serious about certain things. Like they're very serious about the Catan and the Lethani. But then, when you see Tempe at the bar hanging out with like women and stuff, he's just having fun. He's joking around, what I mean. Like, so, being personable. So they let their hair down. But when it's time to fucking work, like do the Catan, do the Lethani, they get pretty serious. But even Vachette, like while they're doing this, she's cracking jokes and
no, it's not just it's. I guess it's not just that though either. It's like, yes, they're laid back and they have this like innocent side where, and Tempe likes comedy and whatever, but then it's the moral code. It's like when there's a serious question at hand, they're they're driven by their morality. I mean, that's what.
Well, it's like if you talk to someone who's like, extremely, religious, like you can find them joking around a lot, but then when it comes to their religion, they take that extremely seriously. And so like that's similar to how they are with the Lethani. I mean, they take it very seriously. It is the foundation for their society. The Lethani and their Catan, like those are two pillars of their society. So they take those very seriously. To the point that if an outsider learns it, they start thinking about like how many fingers they need to cut off this dude.
Yeah, murder or maiming, dismemberment, cut out his tongue or his eyes. It's crazy. Yeah. Man. But I mean, that's a great example of how seriously they do take it.
And then you get, this is why Shane's decision is not an easy one to make. She must balance what is right against what is best for her school, all the while taking into consideration the good of the entire path of the sword tree. Rather than make a rash decision, she is playing a more patient game. Personally, I think she's hoping the problem will take care of itself. And he's asked her how. She's like, you could run off, or I could decide that or if I decided you weren't worth teaching, that would have taken it out of her hands as well. Or you could die during your training or become crippled. I stared at her. She shrugged. Accidents happen. Not often, but sometimes. Red had been your teacher. Jeez. And so then, he asks, how do you become one? And then he's like, it's like, first someone must stand on your behalf saying you are worthy of joining the school. Tempe, I asked. Someone of consequence, she clarified. So that must be you, I said slowly. She's like, I only took you 2 guesses. But I love that. I love how much they cut down on Tempe throughout this. Like, because we see Tempe, he's not, like, they act like he's just this complete buffoon. And he's not. Like, we see him, he's a smart, intelligent, witty and funny dude. He's hilarious. He's one of the funniest characters in the book. Sometimes unintentionally so, but he's a funny dude. Like, he's got the great lines about the hairy balls. Like, that's hilarious. So
It's
Like they're completely undercutting him,
I think
underappreciating him.
I think it's definitely. I mean, I think it's definitely Rothfuss's way of elevating everybody else in their society. Because we know
That
Tempe's not just a complete
and it's the
buffoon as
women
they
that
make
are
him sound.
cutting down on him. And it's a matriarchal society,
Mm-hmm.
and they tend to have a lower opinion of men. And I mean, with the man mothers and you
Yeah,
guys aren't good fighters because your anger and your just your personalities and
yeah.
like I
It's like
mean,
they can't
yeah,
hold their
just not as good as
yeah.
they view the men as inferior in many respects.
Hmm.
And so that's, I think part of it too is when they're just cutting down on Tempe. I think a part of it is just that matriarchal society shit.
Yeah, definitely seems to be a combo. But what I was saying is, it does definitely seem to elevate them because when you consider like what we read with Tempe on read throughs, you remember in the back of your mind like he's the fucking loser of their group, and he's extraordinarily impressive when we read what
Yeah.
he's able to do, and how great he is able to fight and everything else. So it's, I mean, again, the repay reading on these books is just it's next to none as far as I'm concerned.
And that's the thing. Like we see how dominant a fighter Tempe is, and like if he's at a lower rung for his fighting skills, like that's not something that you would see. Like I mean, Tempe was laid waste to like those, what was it, three people, three people. Like I mean, he beat them in a matter of seconds, knocked
Yeah,
them all out cold,
yeah, ridiculously
and
quick. And these were all
yeah,
fighters. These are professional fighters. They're
yeah,
mercenaries,
yeah,
and they're all ready to fight.
yeah.
Like they're all
It's
amped
not,
and
yeah. This is
pissed.
not their first brawl, and so
Yeah,
yeah, it's just for someone to be that good at fighting, it's just like that's not something that happens. Like you don't just become so good at fighting that you're taking on multiple groups of people and just annihilating them. Yeah, you could have a system where training helps, and if they knew the full battery of different martial arts and wrestling moves and that in boxing, taekwondo, and all this kind of jujitsu and all this kind of these kind of things. They know all this stuff, and you're in a world where if the rest of the people don't know it, one on one be deadly.
yeah.
2-on-1, if they didn't fight together, you could still be pretty deadly. You start getting 3-on-1, 4-on-1, unless they just don't know what the fuck they're doing, and they're not fighting together at all, and they're just coming at you one at a time, then you're just not taking out 4-on-1. You're gonna get tackled.
Yeah. There's too many percentages of chance,
Yeah.
right? There's just way too many, and you cut down on those percentages of chance by being more skilled, more trained, like you said, know all the different martial arts. But that still doesn't. That's not enough to justify what they're actually able to do. Because again, that's why there does have to be some
If they were
magic
like
or something
if they were like
extraordinary involved.
7 foot tall and 300 pounds, and they were just like built like just monsters,
Mm-hmm.
then it'd be more believable, because then you would be like, okay, like if two people tried to tackle him, it'd be hard to get that person to the ground unless you were as big as him. It'd be hard to take him down. So like if you go and try to wrap him up, he could just like grab you and throw you. Like so,
It's a question of that. It'd have to be either
but these
like
are like
it's
even
either
like little
like
tiny girls are
well,
doing this.
it's either like massive size or some type of weaponry and armor. It's
Yeah,
almost like the
to be able to
shark.
fight like 4-on-1, you have to be able to stay on your feet. And if you're a little short person, you're not staying on your feet. Two
Well,
people are going to take you to the ground.
what it makes me think of is Stormlight Archives. They're wearing shard plate.
Yeah.
Huge difference maker, man.
Yeah.
You could take on quintuple that number, right? And it's because of the armor and the fucking shard blade. So it's like there's not a lot they can do if they don't have those weapons as well. But when you're talking physical contact, when you're I mean, I'm trying to remember the largest amount that we saw. I mean, even like 3-on-1, and again, Tempe's on the low rung, and he seemed very confident that he could take on 3, maybe 4, right?
Yeah.
So
now, if there's a process like through their conversations about the Lithani and their training and the environment that they live in, and this combination, it's like slowly opening up the sleeping mind, making it percolate and be a little bit more awake. And so it's helping you, like when someone goes to slam his head down on your nose, you see it coming and you're able to kind of, adjust, drop your head so you mess him up instead. Like if there's that kind of aspect, then okay, then it's starting to make sense. Because like if you know what everybody's doing, like, and you're able to move, you see it coming a mile away, then you can, you could step out of the way of people and stuff.
Well, the way that we see it with the Matrix, right, is everything goes super slow.
Yeah.
So you're able to move and do all these things. And because of the K-Tan and how taut your body is, your body can actually physically also do it.
Yeah.
So because of all that muscle memory, all that training, now you're acting upon the fact that you're able to slow down time.
Yeah, and too, like the way they talk is like it seems like it's a situation like that because they say they move real fast, but it's not a natural thing. It's not like everybody like even boxers, the people who are really fast, they stand out because there's not many of them. Like it's not, you can't teach fast. Speed. Yeah. That's not something you can become a little bit faster, but you cannot become like elite fast. That's you either got it or you don't.
Yeah.
That's not something you learn. You can't teach speed. Because if you could, everybody would be running 4.340s. Because why? Like, what athlete wouldn't want to be fast?
Yeah,
there's some slow
advantage.
Athletes.
Yeah. That's another very valid point. Yeah,
So it's not like you just like, oh, we train to be fast. And it's like you can't. You can train to be faster, but you can't train to be fast. You either are or you're not.
I feel like we're getting closer and closer, like the target, you know what I'm saying?
Mm-hmm.
Like when you just kind of whittle down all the things that this would have to be and kind of has to mean and the way it looks. I was going to bring that up earlier because it'd be really interesting opportunity for a director. How do you show that perfect step? Right? What does that look like? Does it just look like
you could show like you could show just like someone like tries to stomp your foot and you pull your foot back and it barely misses, or he throws a punch and you just like dodge back your head just a little bit and it goes right in front of your face. It looks
effortless, basically. Yeah. The reason I thought about that is it seems like the way that Kavoth sees any of these individuals, you just see it. You know it when you see it type situation. Yeah. That they waste no movement. So yeah, I guess that's it. It's like it's basically you move just enough, no more than you have to, right? That would look pretty nutty because you're just basically rolling, like you say, rolling with the punches. You're just literally rolling out, and so you'd always fall forward with momentum, dodging. And
the scene with like Tempe and Daydan would be a good one to demonstrate that because like if someone's throwing, you show someone throwing like a couple of punches, and you're just like move your head to the left a little and it just misses you, or you move back a little and it just misses you. And, he throws a couple individual punches and like you barely moved, but got out of the way of the punches. And then he throws a bunch of combos at you and he starts just going and throwing like a 6-piece combo and you're just boom, 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 boom and dodging every single one of them, but just barely dodging them.
Mm-hmm.
Like then you could kind of get the point across that this guy is extremely difficult to hit. Like he's extremely difficult to get near.
And then that tells you, just that alone tells you there's something else going on here. Right? He does that every time.
Yeah.
He does that every time he fights somebody. He just does, he does this combo move of evasiveness.
Yeah.
Like that's not going to work every time because people don't punch the same every time. But
I mean, even Mayweather would get hit, but I mean, he was great. He could roll a lot of punches, but he's still making contact with him. I mean, it's still a guy standing in front of you. It's not, and when you add in like kicking and that kind of stuff, or they can tackle you, like how are you can't just dodge everything.
Yeah,
person's going to make contact with you. So, yeah, I think I think that there is probably something there to the Lethani, the K-Tan, the environment that is opening up the sleeping mind, even if they don't that's not how they conceptualize it, or they don't realize that's exactly what's happening, I think that is likely what is happening. And I think the clearest clue towards that is Kavoth taking perfect steps when he's full blown seeing the name of the wind, sleeping mind is in control, and he's taking the perfect steps and doing their moves like Cheyenne. That, you know, he's doing that magically. He wasn't able to do that before.
Yeah, I have a feeling that's the 99 stories contain elements and maybe metaphors and things of that nature that
probably
work
ways
to open the sleeping mind, to wake the
exactly.
sleeping mind.
Exactly. That's what I was going to say, and that's what I think is likely. You know, the 99 stories. It's about opening up your mind to that other
Does a Loden
view of the world. Because like when
Loden have access to these stories, he needs these stories.
Yeah.
Man. He'd be
it
killer.
seems like it seems like a Loden doesn't need anything. I bet you, like, if when you think about what you could do with just the name of the wind and you could call a tornado, like, what could anybody do against you? If you could put yourself at the center of a tornado and have the tornado blow out from around you, there's nothing anyone could do. How would you, unless you had that ability to name too? Like, how could you get close? Like, I mean, you're talking making 400 mile per hour winds. Like, that's, you're not going to be able to shoot him. Like, I brought it up online. Someone was like, well, what if, you know, shot him with an arrow? Because I was talking about, it would have been really cool to see a what if for, like, what would have happened had Kavoth had to fight the Adem to get out of Herod if they were going to cut off his fingers.
And he's full panic
and
mode.
Yeah, like I was saying, like, if with sympathy, be tough. He's probably going to get overwhelmed, and there's just too many of them, and they're too good of fighters. So sympathy, I don't think could do it. Naming, though, if he called the name of the wind, I think he could annihilate all of them. And unless they have namers too, which I suspect they do, like, because they give him his name and stuff. Like, naming is important to them as well, and their history, given how far back their history goes. There's likely namers in their group, but without that, if they didn't have that, and he called a tornado, what could you do?
He uses the tree. He uses all those leaves falling out of the tree and slices people up.
You wouldn't even need to. Like, a tornado is going to just pick someone up and throw them 500 feet. I mean, what are they?
Especially with
they're
wind,
dead.
The wind they have there.
Like, if you if you don't appreciate how devastating a tornado is, go look up, like, online. Just look up bad tornadoes, and like the big ones. Like, they'll toss cars around like it's nothing.
I really, really like thinking about that. The element of, like, people have their own way to access. The idea that Loden's, like, kind of doing this on his own. Obviously, he's been at the university quite a while, but he has his own way of finding the sleeping mind and then trying to teach others while they have their 99 stories, right? So they're accessing it in their way. Loden has his way. And it seems like Loden's tapping into something that not many people living today are able to tap into.
Yeah.
Right. So he's discovering some ways to be able to do this. So it's it's really interesting to picture that coming from the different circles of culture and how people are able to access this. And the idea, I like picturing that Loden just was, like, born intuitively with these abilities. Yeah. Even as a child, he's, stumbling into these things.
Think of it like if you could call the name of the ground the earth, and you could call the name of stone. Like, you could literally just cause an earthquake to split apart the land and just sink their entire city underground and just bury it underground. I mean, like, what could you possibly do? Like, what are we don't know enough about the limitations for naming, but it seems like there's not a lot of limitations to it. When we see what Master Doll's able to do with fire, and we see what Loden's able to do with that wall, turn it basically to sand. Like,
and you consider how much stone there is in Herod, for example.
Yeah.
How much wind there is in Herod, how much earth there is in Herod, where it's just, you could just collapse things.
Yeah.
So it's depending on how much access he has. Plus, again, if he's facing maiming, at the end of the chapter, dude, he's nauseous.
Yeah.
He can't think of anything else. It's no joke. So, and and then applying that to what we've seen before when he gets super stressed out and he's on, it's a threat at this point. He's been pretty successful so far, fucking inventing the lightning and shit, or something similar.
Yeah, yeah,
stabbing old boy to death, like a shit ton of times, taking out a whole battalion.
and I love this little section here where you get some pretty cool descriptions of their fighting.
Dude, it's dope.
Analyzing it, and yeah, it's written in a really cool way. And I think this is like some of the scenes that you could do in a really cool way on TV. I think these would play out very well.
Yeah, it's one of those things where, I mean, I don't think that, I don't know if there are human beings that are able to do what they're describing. I mean, I
No.
guess if you use choreography to such a degree, but it has to look not otherworldly. It has to look, it has to look perfect. It has to look like what Shane's doing is perfect, while what Penta's doing is absolutely absurd, like not physically possible. Like you have to be the best gymnast in the history of the world, basically, to be able
Yeah.
to pull it off. And it reads amazing.
Yeah, and if you nail it down too much, like without explaining it by the magic, if you're just like comparing it to our world, it's not possible with what they're doing.
Yeah.
And like the system, it just doesn't make any sense that two women who are like 5'4", 5'2", 5'6", 120 pounds, maybe in that range, somewhere in that range, that they're going to be two of the greatest fighters in the world. No, that's not happening. Like, even if you take Mayweather, and who's arguably the greatest boxer ever, he's definitely, a top tier boxer in the history of boxing. If you put him in the ring against low level heavyweights, he's not beating them. He's going to try to survive against them, because if he gets hit once, he's going down, and he's not knocking those guys out. Or if you take the lower weight UFC fighters and you put them in the heavyweight category, they're getting annihilated. They're just not big enough. There's weight classes for a reason. Like, that's not done arbitrarily. It's because you can go up, like, you could see a guy go up a few weight classes, get bigger, put on some weight, and get a little bigger, and go up a few weight classes. But like a Manny Pacquiao who went up 8 weight classes, he still had a limit. He's not going up against the heavyweights. He was never going to be big enough to go up against heavyweights.
It seems a lot of the justification is pinned on the women's ability to be patient and not let themselves be run by their anger.
Yeah. But that doesn't explain why they can move the way they move, and they can fight, and why they would be able to beat people who are twice their size, that are professional fighters, or just, men that got 60, 70 pounds on them and 6 inches on them. Like, that doesn't make sense why a trained fighter, like a man that it goes through the same training than them, but is way bigger than them, way stronger, faster, all that stuff, why he would be a worse fighter does not make any sense in the sense of our world. Things are different with them biologically. Okay, that makes sense. If it's a magic system, okay, you can make sense of that too. But if it's just, this is what Rothfuss thinks is possible in our world, then no, it doesn't make any sense at all. It wouldn't happen.
The way it would have to be is you can't hit her. So there's that. You're just not able to, because she's so evasive. That's what made Mayweather so good at defense, right?
Mm-hmm.
But the other thing would have to be her strikes are so perfect that the fact that she's so small doesn't matter, because she's packing such a wallop.
Yeah,
there's that, or it's also the leverage. She's breaking your wrist.
Yeah,
she's breaking your forearm. Like she's perfectly moving to debilitate you.
Yeah,
how else does this work?
You can come up with anomalies. There could be an anomaly, situation where just someone's just way different. Doesn't make any sense why they're as good as they are at what they're good at. Like they're just an anomaly. They exist. Manny Pacquiao's an anomaly. You don't see boxers his size go up, 8, 9 classes and just dropping fools in every class. It just he's a one of a kind.
Mm-hmm.
But regardless, that would explain an anomaly. It doesn't explain a generalization where generally the women are better fighters, and
Yeah.
generally like these smaller fighters are some of the best fighters in the world, like where there's a bunch of them, multiples of them that are elite of the elite, but they're super small and tiny. No, that doesn't make any sense. That's not realistic unless there's something magical going on or there's something different about them.
Yeah. Yeah,
Can't
and
just
that's not
be
really
like the
addressed
training,
is the
because
thing.
there's other people who do the same training that are bigger than Penta and Cheyenne and these some of these smaller people. They go through the training too. So why wouldn't the biggest and the strongest, there would still be a weight class system with the
Mm-hmm.
ADEM. You wouldn't
Mm-hmm.
like
Well, they
they
do have
go
it.
like they have a skill based system, but there would also have to be a weight based system with them as well. They're still
Well, they
punching and throwing and kicking and fighting. Like with swords, maybe not. But hand to hand combat, yeah, you're definitely going to have weight classes. That's just
yeah,
part of fighting.
with weapons, yes, it gets equalized, but I mean, they even talk about it with and Pentha and Cheyenne, where it's like, well, she's old.
Yeah.
She can't be expected to keep up. Well, okay, so so there are limitations,
Yeah.
is what we're saying here. So these big dudes, like they're just oafs.
Yeah.
Every guy's an oaf. Is that what we're saying? Like, because
Even
even
still, like,
oafs have,
the heavyweights look like oafs compared to the featherweights,
and
but
they're strong as
featherweights don't
shit.
challenge them. Like,
Yeah.
they
Well,
don't
that's the
fight them.
thing. They
They're
may be
getting
oafs, but they're strong
annihilated.
as shit. Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. So, yeah, it's problematic. That's for sure. But I mean, we get pictures of it with Tempe fighting guys at the bar, and just that ability to,
Here's
that's
like to kind of put it in perspective. Think of a 5'4", 120-pound man, the strongest, the best 5'4", 120-pound man in the world at fighting, at whatever. He's the best at every fighting. Put him in the ring against Tyson Fury, who is 6'9", 250 pounds, and with one of the most ridiculous reaches in the history of arm length. I mean, his reach is absurd. It's something like 80 inches. He's got a ridiculous arm reach. Like that guy fighting someone, the best 5'4", 120-pound fighter in the world, is annihilating that person.
yeah,
First time he hits him, it's over.
yeah. I thought originally you were going to say Tyson in his prime, even, but yeah, Tyson
Tyson
Fury.
Fury, Tyson
Yeah.
Fury,
No, I
the
know.
heavyweight champ. He
I was
is in his
originally
prime.
thinking. No, I was originally thinking Mike Tyson
Oh
in his
yeah,
prime. The how fast he could move, and how he fought inside with people. How would someone that's smaller than him survive?
yeah,
It's 120 pounds, like you said, like you described. We'll see how it's possible, right? You can use your imagination and say, oh, they have all these things they can do with their legs and blah blah blah. But yeah, it's not like you said. The problem is the generalization is
yeah.
the problem, because and that's what he's doing, because he's saying women generally in their
Yeah,
world. And
because
I don't know how big
he
the
gives you an
population
out,
is,
like
but
he gives an out at first, but then he takes the out away. Like because at
yeah,
first she's like, "We're better fighters," but she says it in a way where you could interpret it as she means we know when to pick our fights. Men,
yeah,
men got more testosterone fueled, desires inside of them where they are quicker to anger, quicker to fight, quicker to lose their temper. So women, you could say that she's saying women are in better control of
hmm,
their anger and their animosity and those kind of things. So they're less likely to fly off the handle.
hmm.
Which, I mean, you could look at bar fights. It's almost all men that are fighting in bars. Yeah, some girls will fight in bars, but that's a rare thing. You're
But
usually,
it's
if a fight breaks
also,
out in a bar, it's men.
and it's so that's also choosing to fight, but also within the fight, you can envision that as these guys are sloppier, and we get that with the example of the two
Yeah, but
young dudes.
once you go down that route, then it doesn't make any sense because in general, the men are going to be better because like the ADEM men should still be better than the ADEM women if they're getting the same training. So you can't just go like the
Yeah,
sloppiness route because there's
yeah.
men and women of the same group that are getting the same training. So that doesn't work. But you could say it as like, the men are not fighting within the Lethani. So if you're not fighting in the Lethani, you don't win. So you could go the mental gymnastics of that, but then we see the top tier fighters, and like Penta and Cheyenne are, supposedly way above Tempe, which
Mhm.
doesn't wouldn't make any sense. And way above,
Yeah, I mean,
way above all the other men. Like that doesn't make any sense. How are these like your two best fighters, and they're five? They're short and they're skinny, and they're just no. They're not going to be the best hand to hand combat fighters in the world. It's just not going to happen.
yeah, I mean, unless what we're judging on is like fencing, it's like
Yeah,
contact, just
yeah.
contact alone, then that's different. But if it's winning a fight on the ability to knock somebody out and to overpower them, because part of a fight is power overpowering the other individual, then yeah,
Yeah,
it
I
doesn't.
mean,
The
there
math
is
doesn't add up.
power is important, and you're not even on the same level when you're small and little.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, you don't. Yeah, you don't have the reach, right?
No, You
You don't have
can't
the
put
height. You
you
don't have the
can't put the
reach.
same strength behind your punches.
Hmm.
You know, so I mean, that's the history of fighting. We've seen this the entire human history. This has been the case. This isn't like just not talking out of my ass. I mean,
This is all cultures. Yeah,
there's a reason we have weight classes,
yeah.
and
You got to
so
even
and
the
there's a
playing
reason
field.
men don't fight women, and
Yeah,
it's not fair. So
yeah.
it's just one of those things where that would be the case. So again, I definitely think that there is something magical going on because you see it too. It's like when we'll get to it, like, but some of the moves Penta does and stuff like that, where it's like that's not humanly possible. Like that's something different is going on. They're reaching for something that is completely different. Her and Shay. I love that description because that's why I say spinning leaf is kind of like a window into the name of the wind.
Hmm.
And now that he's got this easy access where he can kind of open this up and close it, I think it's why he takes a significant step forward here versus when he calls the name of the wind with Florian, or when he calls the name of the wind against Ambrose. He doesn't have easy access to it after that. He's not able to just slip right back into it. Here
Hmm.
he loses it for a second, but then he slips right back into it. And then
Hmm.
when he gets back and he starts using it more, he starts having easier access to it. It starts coming to him easier and easier. And I think it's that spinning leaf is giving him kind of the more control than just the wild door open of the sleeping mind, just doors wide open, and it's massive, overwhelming experience for him where he's just seeing everything and he can't even process the information, whereas this is more of a controlled access to the sleeping mind. It seems different.
Yeah. Well, and part of me also wonders how much of it is he's in this world. He's in Ademre, and
Yeah,
how much of it is because of where he is,
it,
I think there's a combination going, but we have continuously seen him getting better and better grasp of the name of the wind as well. So it's a it's masterfully written. The way he arcs it out overall with these incidents are tremendous, But then to mix it in with what happens here, but what I do think is so important, like you mentioned, he loses it and brings it back, not fully consciously, right? The second time, but it comes back like that,
yeah,
right? Like he was in it, and then it just kind of was still. It was almost like it was still active, but went away and then comes right back. Yeah.
yeah. He just had to relax. He lost it in a moment, which is interesting because he loses it in a kind of a moment of anger, which normally like
Just gave
a
him
high
access
emotion
prior.
brought it to him.
Yeah.
This time it threw him out of it, and then once he calmed back down again, then it came back to him again.
So I
So
think that's it.
it's a
That's it.
different experience, and I do think that's part of the environment because we've seen him when he's watching the tree. He started to see patterns. He mentions patterns
Uh-huh.
in the wind multiple times while he's here, and just this time, it fully with the pressure of the situation being on the stage, it just fully everything kind of came into place and he locked in.
I think that's a really important part of it as well, is the fact that he eases into it rather than being heightened into it I think is huge, right? This is more of like a load and access, right? Where
Yeah.
he eases into these things rather than being forced or pushed, throttled into, which would be more jarring.
Yeah. Yeah, and that's like kind of the way I envision it is like the spinning leaf gives him kind of access through a window versus throwing the doors wide open and
Yeah.
not having any kind of real control over it, where it's kind of controlling you.
Hmm.
That's seems to be the difference. Is like spinning leaf has given him that more controlled access to it than he's had before, where it's
Yeah.
less intense. I mean, he sees it, he's able to call it, he's able to control it, but it's not as intense. He doesn't need a Loden to wake him out of a catatonic state,
Yeah.
after this, and he doesn't need to stand there and bawl his eyes out for a while with Florian. Like those were
One.
intense emotional moments that
Hmm.
were extremely jarring coming out of. Here he comes out of it and he's fine immediately. There's no
Yeah.
that wildness is not there this time.
Yeah, it's interesting those two occurrences as well because they're kind of also like self defense. And
Yeah.
with Florin, it's fully basically self defense. With Ambrose, it is hostile. And then here, it's coming out of. I mean, there's a lot of nervousness and stakes are high, but yeah, he's relaxed
Yeah.
and he sees it, and then it comes to. So yeah, the experiences are very different. It's really cool, and then he's cognizant enough to even he has the choice of utilizing it in one way, stopping the wind. Well, that
Yeah.
seems wrong, so he makes another choice, and yeah, it's great. I mean, envisioning the experience is very very satisfying as a reader.
Yeah, it that's a huge part of naming. I think that's important, like to understand as far as how to utilize it. Because when he sees it, he says, I looked around for a moment, marveling in it. I tasted the shape of it on my tongue and knew if I desired, I could stir it to a storm. I could hush it to a whisper, leaving the sword tree hanging empty and still. But that seemed wrong. Instead, I simply opened my eyes wide to the wind, watching where it would choose to push the branches, watching where it would flick the leaves. And so then he steps out there, he sees the pattern, and he sees where the wind is directing everything, where everything's going to go, and he knows perfectly where to step. He knows exactly how far he can move, where he has to move to avoid being cut, and he's moving just perfectly. And that's when he's like notices, I'm moving like Cheyenne moves when she
Mhm.
fights. It's like I'm taking the perfect steps and it's the perfect movements, and I'm moving in lockstep with the pattern. And I don't think that's just I think that's significant in that it shows you that you're able to kind of see the name of these things, but you don't have to call it. You could just
Mhm.
see it and feel it and look at it. But if you want to actually activate it and utilize the power, you have to call the name. You have to physically speak the name. You have to say the word. There's like some kind of locking mechanism before you can
There's like a
use
trigger.
the power, that you have
Mhm.
to say the word to trigger that power to utilize it for your own purpose. But then also what Cheyenne's doing, I don't think that she's just taking the perfect steps because she's practiced fighting a lot. I think it's part of this naming and this sleeping mind, and whether she's conscious of it or not, I do think that this is the example where you can really figure out, like, okay, they're doing something more than just they practice real
Mhm.
hard at fighting.
Yeah, she's seeing the Matrix, and that's what
Yeah.
he's seeing, and his ability to. I love that they make that comparison because it really locks a lot of things in for us in terms of what happens within the Adem and what they're able to do in this world is in particularly here, but then also carry that out. So they are accessing it. It seems the fact that he's able to sit in it and not trigger right says a lot about how much control he has now,
Yeah.
and how he's going to be able to wield it in the future because now he's sitting in it and taking his moments. Meaning, think about he gets control of other things. He gets those rings, right? Well, when he gets control of these other things, he's not going to be all hot headed with the wind or what, like with stone or fire, whatever he ends up with. Because why would he recede back to that earlier experience, right? Like Elodin, I believe, was the one that talked about starting with the wind. I mean, that was one of the things that the old masters, starting with the wind is one of the best places to start, because if you can wield, I don't know, if you can control the wind, you can control so many other things because you've gone through the motions.
Yeah, I think probably the reason for that is the wind is ever changing, and I think that there's less changing with stone, and so I
Yeah.
bet you that if you can grasp something that is, because Elodin talks about like the name of the wind, he's like it's different from place to place, but I know how to look for it, and I think that's why it's easier to call the name of the wind. If you learned how to call the name of the wind, it's easier to figure out the others because I don't think they're changing from place to place. I think
As
that
much,
they're
at least,
more,
yeah.
once you know how to call the stone, you know it for good. Like it's not different from place to place. So I
There's
think
got to
that's
be, I would imagine
likely
there's less
why.
variation. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah,
But
well, and then and that's why I bring that up also to consider if he ends up with all these rings, he's just going to have better mastery, given the fact that he's gone from, breaking Ambrose's arm in a huge gust, and then someone else having to pull him out of it, and then his experience with Florin, and then what that does to him, and all these. Now he's able to basically turn it on and off to a pretty significant degree. Now he's being helped, and it does seem like this is happening in this world. He's being helped, but it's just got to get easier and easier because it has been.
yeah.
I mean, it seems logical to expect that. I would say.
Now, when he sees the name of the wind, obviously for this part, everything turns green, and it's the numbers, the ones and zeros, all
Yeah.
coming down. He
Yeah.
sees it
It's all the
just
code. It's just coding it.
yeah, just like the Matrix.
Yeah, that would be an odd choice if they were to just homage the shit out of the visually homage the Matrix. I do see definite value in music and slowing, doing some slow mo, a little bit of that, some depth perception. Messing around with some zoom and tracking and stuff like that.
What if it's like a real big fat guy, huge belly that's got little tiny wings, and he's flying around and he's just blowing everything.
They just go into animation suddenly.
Yeah.
It's all, yeah. They just suddenly launch into animation when things slow down.
Like when you see the name of the wind, you see like a big fat fairy blowing.
It's a cupid,
blowing,
a big fat cupid.
yeah, like a cupid, but he just blows air on everything and blows things around. Once you see that pattern, what he's blowing at, you know where everything's going.
That'd be an odd choice. That'd be a very, very odd choice to run with. But
it could work. It could work. You could do it. You could pull it off. I think people would really like it.
I don't think so. I think people would be very upset. They would be confused.
It'd be worth trying on a really big budget movie. You gotta take chances like that.
Yeah, launch into some really strange. Bring in some other force. Sounds very strange.
That there's something I've been waiting to speak to you about. And Shane said, guarded curiosity. After Tempe brought you here, he told me the long story of your time together, she said, of your search for the bandits. I nodded. She's like, is it true that you made blood magic to destroy some men, then called lightning to destroy the rest? And I love that Vachette looks at them like, what? Yeah. What did you just say? Like looking back and forth like, all right, what? Hold on. He did what now? Completely unaware. But it's also like, is she unaware that, that type of thing is even possible? Like, is she shocked that that this is something she's never seen anybody do this type of thing before? So it'd like to hear that it actually exists would be mind blowing. That Kavoth, the person she's training, would be capable of such a thing would be mind blowing. Or is it just that she's surprised that Kavoth is capable of it?
Yeah, it's a good question. It's kind of wild too that the way it comes out, you're like, man, I should have thought about this. At least for me, where it's like, it's not the type of thing I didn't necessarily think of being talked about, but it would make total sense that he would.
Yeah,
right? When he's like trying to sell him to the school in the first place, like you don't know what this guy's capable of, like the amount of power he can wield. It would make sense that Tempe would tell him, but the fact that we're not told that he told him, then why would doesn't occur. There's a lot of things that distract us from thinking about it in the first place.
Yeah.
But when that does come up, it is kind of like, whoa, okay.
I would guess that at least Cheyenne, she doesn't seem like to think that there's an impossibility to being able to do this. Like she
Mm-hmm.
seems to accept that blood magic and what Tempe tells him that tells her that he did. She seems to accept that that's possible. Like she's accepting of the magical ability that it exists and people can do it. So it seems like it would be something that there's people in Adem that are capable of this thing, especially when he gets his name and you see that she's much like a Loden in many respects. And her, when she gives him her name, he calls it towards the way she looks at him and the way he feels is how Loden makes him feel. It seems like there's almost surely naming ability in this society. So again, that further gives evidence towards that there's something magical going on with this society beyond just a natural ability or practice or anything like that. So it's
Well,
worth
and also,
bringing up.
it also feels like they would also be more accepting of the existence of these things, given that they accept the Chandrian are real,
Yeah,
right? They exist instead of
but
everybody else,
and why do they accept that the Chandrian are real? And then that's the question is like, why would they accept that? Have they seen it, or is it just something that they just believe in like a superstition, and they've just been told that it exists, and so they just accept it even without knowledge of it? Doesn't seem like that's the case. It seems like they have firsthand experience with these kind of things, and it seems like that their history goes back a long time. Like their swords, swords seem magical, and I think they probably understand that there is something magic about their swords. They
yeah.
probably understand that their swords are different than other swords,
Yeah, and
and
it does seem like, well, and their stories are extraordinarily important to them. They keep it alive,
yeah,
right? They keep those stories alive and they keep them in their culture, and they emphasize just how important it is when they issue names and swords and all of that. So that also, I mean, that in itself adds emphasis to just how important and how real these things are. And like you said, though, like how else do you explain these swords?
yeah.
If they're not magical.
Why do they know the Chandrian? Why they know that their swords go all the way back to the before the block of Drazentor. I mean, just the sword that Kavoth has goes back before the one of the major battles of the Creation War where Lanre was killed. Like they trace their swords back to that battle. Like so they could trace things all the way back there, and they have the stories, and they can pass all this stuff down. They know about the magic, and then they're accepting that it is something that a person would be capable of. Then you see that the lady seems to have some kind of naming ability similar to a Loden, and their story about the Chandrian and how much they know. They know their names. They know their true names, at least purport to know their true names. It seems like that there's this race of people. It's not just like people that just were nomadic people and they just found a spot to live. They were just normal humans that found a spot. It sounds like that they go all the way back before the Creation War, that the Ruax, and then they ended up here, isolated in their own insular community, and they have all their stories that go back. Got this tree that's got spinning leaves. They seem to move magically. They have crazy abilities. It seems like that this is just an ancient race that's more powerful, more connected to the old magics than regular people that you would meet like around the mayor or something.
It also really makes sense that they would stay insular too, because it would allow them to continue to be hang on to their traditions.
Yeah,
Because it does seem to be, at least in so many ways in our world, that when you do have that, I mean, traditions just sort of they kind of weaken over time to some degree, as there's a I don't know what would you call it, but people leaving one area going to another, and then in some ways tradition strengthens because they want to hang on to it, but in others it weakens. People start their own traditions, rather than sticking to the old ways.
but I mean, they obviously have a significant amount of ability, but I there's just so much to it that points to the fact that this is a very ancient race, that it's just hard to like read this stuff and not accept that this is, this is an ancient race of people that are different than just the regular people in the world. Maybe they have the same biological chemistry or something like that, but they're different in their ability to access the sleeping mind seems to be significantly more. And I think it's probably because of their lineage and where they are located. In similar way to where when Kavoth is there, how he's got better access to the name of the wind than he's ever had before, and he accesses it in a completely different way, in a more controlled way, and without the heightened emotion. So it just seems like that's the significant part of his time here. One of the significant parts of his time here is the Adem and the, because it's not that Rothfuss like tells you specifically all these things. He's just got a lot of implied information about them, or implicit information about them, that if you start pulling pieces away and looking at the picture of like, okay, if this, that means this, and you start doing that with the Adem, then you start piecing together, like, if they were around for the block of Draws and Tor, if there's the Eighth and Wraith happened before that, their swords go back before that, what does all that mean? And that's where you can kind of start tying together what exactly is going on with the Adem.
One of the things that does just kind of bring up a question in my mind also is they're mercenaries for hire that travel throughout the world. If their land is so significant to their powers, how much do they take with them? How much do they lose? You know what I mean?
Well, you would think like Kavoth, when he goes to back to the university, it's not like he loses his naming ability. It's strengthened. It's like he got opened up to it.
Yeah.
It's not that he needs this to be by that tree to suck the power from it. It's just more that the tree opens him up to the power to begin with. Like, the power is everywhere, but this is just kind of opening his mind up to the sleeping mind, making that access to the power easier. That's what it seems to do.
I mean, it is a windy place, right? But I wonder though in regards to how it gives them added abilities. I wonder if it's just a great training ground for them to be able to move into that area, which then they can access wherever they are.
I think it's that. I don't think that there's a power source from the tree that they're draining into their body or something like that. I think there's just the sleeping mind, and if you can access it, you have those, you have the ability to see these different powers and use them. But like, maybe being by this tree, even if it's just kind of subconsciously, where maybe you're not seeing the name of the wind, but you kind of sense a pattern to things. So you're a little more in tune than you normally would be. I think it probably makes that access a little easier, that it opens your mind up a little bit. Not necessarily that you're draining power from it, and if you're close to it, you have more power. The further away you get from it, you have less power. I don't think that's the case at all. But I do think that it opens your mind up to the ability that the sleeping mind is the power. And I think that just these kind of areas open you up to the sleeping mind better.
It's sort of like that courtyard, the Hall of the Wind or whatever.
Yeah, or even like the intense emotions opened him up to the power in a different way. I think there's just different things that open your mind up to it, and I think they just are in a prime spot for that.
So he's just bipolar and hallucinates.
Yep, that's exactly what I said.